Welcome back to Business 110 Online. We're going to talk today briefly about two chapters. Again, this is no substitute for reading the book, but we're going to talk about Chapter 4, which discusses ethics, and Chapter 5, which talks about business form. So a couple key things on ethics. There is a difference between what's legal, which is compliance, and sort of ethically based. So sometimes, selling a poor product often is not illegal, or false advertising isn't illegal, but it's certainly not ethical. An example of something that might be ethical but not legal is, I remember my wife was pregnant. It was 2 a.m. We were running to the hospital and we were stuck at a red light. There was nobody in town. I ran the red light. Certainly, I believe that's ethical, but it's not legal. Now, corporations encourage ethical behavior, and they oftentimes go beyond the basics of just compliance because you hope people will do more than just compliance to the law. Certainly, if you're a parent, I hope my children aspire to more than, what I want for my children is they never get arrested. I don't think that's what most parents want. They want them to go beyond just the basic legals or the basic baseline of compliance to something beyond that, to sort of ethical behavior. So code of compliance is just complying with the law. Code of integrity kind of goes above and beyond that. And then the third point I would want to highlight on this whole ethical behavior is it's really not very simple. Normally, very difficult ethical dilemmas are choosing between two very substandard solutions. So that's the chapter on ethics. The other chapter talks about different business forms. So one form is a corporation, and if that's where you actually create a separate entity or a separate person. So the key pro to that is if somebody slips and falls in my factory or in my store, I can say, hey, you don't sue me. I've created this separate entity called a corporation. You go sue them. So it limits my liability if I have a corporation to whatever money I've put into the corporation. Because again, once I create a corporation, I've created a separate entity or a separate person, so to speak, named the corporation, that if somebody needs to sue, they go sue them. That's the biggest pro. The biggest con is now that I've created this separate entity, the government's going to have two folks to tax. They're going to tax me on my income that I make in the corporation, and they're going to tax the corporation on any income they make. So it's called double taxation. Biggest pro, limited liability. Biggest con, double taxation. Now, for a sole proprietorship or a partnership where you don't create this separate entity, the pros and cons are kind of flipped around. The key pro for sole proprietorship or partnership is it's very simple, and you don't double tax because you haven't created a separate entity. The biggest con is you've had what's called unlimited liability. Somebody slips and falls in my store now, they can sue the owner of the store for all of that person's assets. The third point is governments invented what I call hybrids, like subchapter S corporations, etc. And you want to read about these and understand them in the practical sense if you ever get into this, because they basically are the best of both worlds. The book has all the details, all the legitimate thing. Key thing for you is to be aware of them. Mergers like a marriage, acquisitions like a purchase, franchise is like McDonald's where you buy a piece. Biggest pro is you're buying a business model that works, some expertise. Biggest con is you really don't have a lot of freedom in a franchise, and you pay a pretty good price for them. They tend to be very expensive. That's chapter 4 and 5. Any questions? Let me know.